are live. Jessica, how's it going? Happy Tuesday.
Yay. Happy Tuesday. I'm super excited to be here. This has been kind of a long time coming, so let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about, well, this is our first episode of Blockchain Simplified, actually. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin reserves. But first, we'll do intros. I'm Jessica Levesque. I'm the executive director at C4. And C4 is a nonprofit. We've been around since 2014. We do education and certification, and we're the organization that has the cryptocurrency security standard.
Yes, fantastic. Lovely, Jessica. And I am Trevor Talley. I'm with the Crypto Recruiters. We are the premier agency when it comes to helping amazing companies find great talent in this space that we are in. And we work with everything that is related to crypto, blockchain, Web3, and adjacent. So, super, super excited to have this conversation and educate our
Mhm.
community. But what we're going to be really starting out, and first and foremost, the topic of the hour is our Bitcoin reserves actually becoming a reality. And in this
Right.
episode, it's a hot topic, Jessica. And as you know, what a difference a day makes.
I know.
24 little hours in our space is a lot, and so much has even changed over the weekend. So we were updating some of the things that we wanted to chat with you all about today. But really, ultimately, what we want to get to is why this recent executive order by President Trump, what's it all about, the impact of these kind of social media posts. And Jessica will talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we need to get into kind of like what a crypto reserve is or what a reserve is in general. And we're going to go through and actually get into all of the details. So, like Trevor said, everyone always says this space moves really fast, but it's funny when you're planning to do a stream about something that is so current and the current events keep changing. And I'm sure there's stuff happening on crypto Twitter right now that we're missing. So, we'll just do the best that we can. And as of when we started, this is all accurate, so we'll see how it goes and what shifts and changes. But Trevor, do you want to just explain what a strategic reserve is, what that looks like, and do we
Yes.
have any already?
Absolutely. And before we even get into the context, I would say specifically about, crypto or digital asset strategic reserves. I did want to just bring a little attention to what at least in the context of the US, we've already had strategic reserves of other commodities and other kind of assets. Um,
Hmm.
the US is known globally for having one of the biggest kind of petroleum reserves. So, that's a largest supply of kind of emergency crude oil, and
Yeah.
really presidents in the past have tapped in to this kind of stockpile to either kind of calm oil markets during war or when there are hurricanes that kind of really hit some important infrastructure here, at least stateside. And then
Hmm.
also too, other countries, for example, Canada has the world's only strategic reserve of maple syrup, which is very strange, but makes sense. And
Hmm.
China, has strategic reserves in metals, grains, even pork products and things like that. So, these are just typical type of things that countries have kept in times of good and bad so that they can make sure that whatever that asset is that the people have enough of that so that they can make sure that they survive any kind of like ups and downs when it comes to the any kind of economic things that are going on. So that's really a little bit of
Hmm.
the context, and now it all makes sense even more so, Jessica, as to why we would be exploring having a strategic reserve around digital assets, because
Hmm.
we're definitely shifting towards a new type of economy.
Right. Yeah. As you were talking about the reserves that currently exist, I just remembered there's a cheese reserve in the United States as well. I don't know, I think millions of pounds of cheese. I have to have to look that up. So anything can
What
be a
I wonder what
reserve.
kind of cheese.
I know. We'll have to look that up. But I think anything can be reserve. It's how useful is it? Why does it
Yeah.
exist? And so we've heard a lot about crypto reserves, Bitcoin reserves. This has kind of been circling around for a while. And let's walk through the timeline of things. So the first time I think Trump publicly really talked about reserves or Bitcoin as a strategic reserve was in 2024 at the Bitcoin 2024 conference. And then that kind of
Yeah.
got everybody going and excited. And then things have shifted a little bit since then. So then on January 23rd, 2025, there was an executive order from Donald Trump saying that there needed to be a working group that was going to come together to evaluate a national digital asset reserve. So he said, it is therefore the policy of my administration to support the responsible growth and use of digital assets, blockchain technology, and related technologies across all sectors of the economy. So everyone's scrambling around saying, what does this mean? We're not really sure. And then suddenly on Sunday, there were some social media posts that happened that brought in new conversations. And so I'm just going to read what he quoted because I think that's
Yeah,
the easiest
yeah,
way to understand it. So he first posted, a US crypto reserve will elevate this critical industry. And he said that this is why my executive order on digital assets directed the presidential working group to move forward on a crypto strategic reserve that includes XRP, SOL, and ADA. I will make sure the US is the crypto capital of the world. Then we're not exactly sure what happened between then. Somebody probably, put a bug in his ear or he realized he forgot something. And there was another post later that said, and obviously BTC and ETH as other valuable cryptocurrencies will be the heart of the reserve. I also love Bitcoin and Ethereum. So that's what we heard from him. And there has been so much conversation, not just related to will there be one, but should there be one? And also now, what should be in this reserve? If we're not talking about a Bitcoin reserve, what assets should come in? So we talked about, we said BTC, ETH, Cardano, Ripple, and Solana. So do you want to get into those a little bit, Trevor? Because I think that if you're not
yeah,
familiar
for
with all of
sure.
these, it's kind of
And yeah,
confusing.
and we're gonna go into, obviously some of the components of Bitcoin and why that's, compared to digital gold. And it's interesting too that we continue to use gold because with other kind of reserves and strategic reserves specifically, there's sometimes like a basket of different kind of assets in there. But with respect to cryptocurrency, so a lot of people are thinking like, why would you even mention anything other than Bitcoin because it does have a finite
Hmm.
supply. We know about the decentralized aspect of that, and it's by far the most popular crypto that's been around the longest and tried and proven, right? But
Hmm.
some of the things that make it great would necessarily probably be better to have other kind of things to complement it, right? So you can think of Bitcoin as digital gold. It's the original, most widely recognized cryptocurrency. It's definitely something that I feel has become maybe like a safe haven asset, kind of akin to gold. And a lot of institutional players. I mean, we've kind of heard about all in the news what's going on there. And as I mentioned before, it does have that fixed supply and the decentralized nature that really makes it an attractive choice as
Hmm.
as a national reserve. And it does have that kind of supply cap to that as well too. Now with Ethereum, some of the justification is that beyond being just a cryptocurrency, Ethereum blockchain really kind of underpins most of what's going on with this the DeFi ecosystem, right? It has smart
Right.
contracts that can facilitate decentralized applications, otherwise known as dApps, that could really be revolutionary for industries such as finance to even things like real estate, and there is no cap on the
Hmm.
supply there. Then we're having Ripple and XRP. So little confusion there as well too. XRP is the actual token. Ripple is the organization. So when it comes to XRP, it is a decentralized ledger that is designed for fast and low cost cross border payments. It's really kind of gained traction among financial institutions as a potential replacement for kind of outdated and expensive kind of remittance systems. There's still kind of this debate, is it truly decentralized? Is it still have, I would say, aspects of centralization, being that they're obviously working closely with the company Ripple, and they
Yeah,
do
the
not
fact
have,
that there's a company, right, that you just had to point that out is part of
yeah,
why there is such a debate about if this is even actually
yeah,
a
and some people kind of
cryptocurrency.
think
Yeah.
about this too, Jess. It's like maybe it's like, could you be more thinking about like Ripple as like the way a relationship like the Ethereum Foundation is with Ethereum or any of these other things, right? So there's obviously a lot of
Mhm.
debate about that. Then we get to Cardano, right? And also known as ADA. So that's really kind of known in the industry and they're respected for their, more peer reviewed research kind of focus approach. It's
Hmm.
something Cardano that they're trying to aim is more for like a scalable and sustainable blockchain ecosystem, with real applications kind of for identity management, finance, government, and they do have a supply cap of 45 million there. And then last but not least, one of the other ones that's been getting some attention is Solana, Sol, and this is really something that's become known in the industry and attractive because of its really a high speed blockchain designed for scalability. You can also have DeFi, NFTs. Obviously, a lot of people have known the amount of volume that they're able to handle, even though they've had some issues just with the recent meme coin craze. And it's also something that is centralized with no kind of real fixed supply cap. So, thinking about these is that, and one of the things that I was thinking about earlier, Jessica, is that with these type of different cryptocurrencies, maybe we're thinking about it as of today, how these are potentially going to be used, but we're not
Hmm.
thinking about, the particular use cases in the future and how technology can evolve overall. And maybe there might not be the same use case for these particular cryptocurrencies today as it's going to look maybe 5 from 10 years from now. And also, too,
Hmm.
the people that are working with the governments, these are pretty smart, intelligent people. So maybe they're a little bit more informed than just the general public and you and I are about this subject.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's important that you pointed out is that Cardano has a supply cap, 45
Hmm.
million. Bitcoin has a supply cap, 21 million, and the other currencies that or assets that we discussed don't. So that is definitely playing into the discussion about whether or not something that has a infinite supply can be considered something that should be used for a reserve. I don't know. We talked about cheese earlier. There's both sides of the argument, I think, and we're hearing a lot of things on both sides. But what has definitely shifted is this conversation about crypto being something that should be considered as a strategic
Yes.
reserve. And David Sachs, the White House crypto czar, said during the crypto ball that happened a while back, he said the reign of terror against crypto is over. So this is kind of pushing that conversation forward. And we're now seeing some select assets being picked as possibly being from it. We don't really know, though, if that is what's going to happen because, as we talked about, things have shifted and changed. And, 1 hour later, we have new assets added to the conversation that weren't before. But so we'll see how it goes. But I think what a lot of people are waiting to see what happens is for what goes on this Friday, I think, which is the White House Crypto Summit, March 7th. Is
Yes.
that this Friday?
It is coming up.
Yeah.
And that first summit, it's going to be on Friday, and it's going to be really kind of uh, crucial to watch kind of what's going on there.
Hmm.
There's a gentleman as well, to the CEO of Coin Bureau, and one of the quotes was interesting that I wanted to point out and share with you all is that we will be waiting to see who will be there, what will be discussed, and whether any actual steps towards implementation are outlined. The key question is, how will they fund and legislate this reserve? Until we have some answers, there's little substance to kind of really support this kind of craze that's been going on with the markets and things like that. So, I think
Hmm.
that before we even talk about what's coming up this potential Friday and how this can be, you know, the blueprint, how this can all be laid out, maybe it really is important to kind of talk a little bit more about what we've made in terms of advances here stateside, um, with some of the different kind of politicians and some of the other things that are going on. And this whole conversation about a Bitcoin reserve, I remember this was Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming, and she was kind of proposing a Bitcoin reserve. And one of the great things about that was that the idea and the premise was to really kind of purchase 200,000 Bitcoin purchased annually for 5 years. And that's just really interesting. And the fact that we're even having this conversation is crazy because,
Hmm.
like a year ago, like even getting anyone from the government politician to speak positively about crypto, this was like
Hmm.
night and day. And we've gone
Right.
so much from then to really shift to having this kind of conversation.
Yeah, and one of the things that Cynthia Lummis, as you said, she is a senator from Wyoming. She said my bets are that you'll see a state have a Bitcoin strategic reserve before the federal government. And that certainly seems to be the way that things are going and shifting. And so we know that we probably wouldn't be discussing this at the federal level if it wasn't for it already being pushed in the states. So Cynthia Lummis has this Wyoming Bitcoin reserve proposal that you just talked about, Trevor. And then there's also 28 other states that are exploring legislation, which is 56% of the states in the
56% of the
US.
states, more than half. That's crazy, right?
When I saw 28 states, I'm like, okay, but then when you put the 56, I'm like, oh yeah, that is more. I mean, obviously, but that's more than half,
It's
and
more
that
than
just
half.
shows how this really is pushing towards
Yeah,
happening. And so the states are. I'm going to run them off quickly so that if you're listening and you're in the U.S., you'll know if your state is starting to have a bill pending. So Texas,
yeah,
Arizona, Utah, Illinois, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, Michigan, Oklahoma, Massachusetts, Kentucky, Missouri, Montana, South Dakota, Indiana, Kansas, Maryland, West Virginia all have bills pending Senate votes. And then Arizona and Utah are in the final stages of approval. So this really is advancements. This has been
yeah.
pushed along.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give a big shout out to Massachusetts for making that list, and then also too we got Illinois on the
I
list as
know.
well too, Jessica. So shout out to our respective states for being in the ring here for consideration. But with
Hmm.
Illinois, they have a House Bill 1844, which really kind of proposes the establishment of a state-run Bitcoin reserve with a mandatory 5-year holding. And then in Pennsylvania, they have a bill that was introduced. It was called the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Act, and this was back in November of last year. But essentially, they're trying to put 10% of state funds going to be invested in Bitcoin. Then with Massachusetts, it's also a similar bill. 10% of the states, quote unquote, rainy day fund should be invested in Bitcoin. Then we have Florida doing something similar as well too. Ron DeSantos mentioned that clearly something like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, that's something we should be willing to accept. So just a really bullish progressive talking there. And then Texas,
Hmm.
they proposed Senate Bill 21, and that is about the creation of a Bitcoin strategic reserve for that state, and really kind of aiming to allocate a portion of those state funds as well too. Within Bitcoin
Hmm.
investments, then we have Arizona. They have the Bitcoin Reserve Act, SB 1025, and that was passed by the Senate Finance Committee. It's being finalized, and that could allocate up to 10%. We have Utah. I mean, the list goes on, and there are some
Yeah.
unsuccessful proposals as well too by states like Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming. But like I said, they're kind of going back and forth and trying to figure some things out. So overall, I think the important part about that, Jessica, is that more people are leaning on the side of doing something and moving forward rather than moving backwards.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things as you were going through that, a lot of the states are proposing Bitcoin strategic reserves. They're not talking
Yes.
about these other currencies, and Trump really wasn't until he sent out these social media posts on Sunday. But so, why don't we talk a little bit about why Bitcoin is the
Yes.
currency that keeps being brought up? What is it about Bitcoin that would make this something that would be potentially more likely to be a reserve currency? And so let's just talk about some Bitcoin facts, which you and I could geek out about all day, but we'll try not to go too long about it. But I think just for anyone who's not familiar with Bitcoin, we talked a little bit about how there's a supply cap, which means there's 21 million Bitcoin that can ever be mined, and 19.8 have already been mined. So this basically means there's 1.2 million left. And you say, well, how can there only be that many left? What's going to happen? Isn't it all going to go away quickly? Well, no, Bitcoin has a code. There are rules set in place and it cannot be messed with. And one of the things that's amazing about Bitcoin is that there is this code for how often the rewards that miners get from participating in the network, how often they reduce the rewards. So right now it is at 3.125. It will in less than 4 years it'll have again. And so we already know that the distribution rate, the issuance rate is set and is not going to change, which is why a lot of people find it as a promising reserve because you already know what's going to happen. in terms of when it's going to be issued and how the issuance schedule works. And that is something very different than fiat or government currency, in which governments can print this currency out, or some of the other currencies we talked about that don't either have a supply cap or they don't have this set up. So that I think is why we're seeing Bitcoin a lot um, in these proposals rather than just crypto in general or some of the other currencies.
Yeah, and kind of going back to one of the points we were talking about earlier, and like why would you even consider anything other than Bitcoin? I think that in terms of the strategic reserve, a lot of people, especially from the conservative approach, right, would say, "Hey, we want something because of those features that you just mentioned, Jessica." Right? That's the only reason why something like Bitcoin should be considered. And then other people are
Hmm.
looking at this from a more progressive approach. Even most recently, I was watching an interview with Michael Saylor, and Michael Saylor of all people kind of had this
Who,
clear
by the way, let's
level-minded.
quickly say who he is. Michael
Yes,
Saylor is the founder of MicroStrategy, which is now going by Strategy, and they've got a
yes,
ton of Bitcoin. He's always promoting it. So yeah, keep going.
a lot of Bitcoin. He's super bullish on Bitcoin, and so the organization. Thank you for that context. But
Hmm.
I think that like a digital progressive approach would be having in a strategic reserve a digital commodity like Bitcoin, right? That has a fixed supply. It's decentralized, fully decentralized. It can't be controlled by any one particular entity. Then we have,
Hmm.
a digital currency in that basket, which could be comprised of stable coins backed by, a respective fiat currency. Then we have like a digital security that has like an issuer backed by a stock or bond, and this could be something that's really used to kind of tokenize Wall Street, and then a digital token that's backed by something that had digital utility. And I think what's really great about what Michael Saylor just mentioned there is that this is a little bit to my point earlier, is that a lot of the debates and the conversation that we're having right now about this particular topic are about like, oh, people are only thinking about where we are today with the technology, and we're
Hmm.
not thinking about where we're moving forward, right? With the um, increased potential of AI, robotics,
Hmm.
autonomous vehicles, drones, all these kind of things that are going to probably be something that are very commonplace to us in 5, 10, 20 years from now. Just the way that all these things even transact, it's really interesting to think about that. And,
Hmm.
if we're going to integrate cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and other kind of digital assets into the quote unquote new financial system, what's going to be the rails? How are we going to have all these things kind of interconnect? Are there ways that all these different blockchains can be interoperable for different reasons and have different use cases? And this is kind of going back to the same thing, right? Like, yes, we're in a strategic reserve. We have oil, we have gold, we have silver, we have palladium, we have platinum, we have other things that are going to be used for different use cases. So that was really
Hmm.
interesting, and it was a pleasure to see Michael Saylor of all people kind of have that
Yeah.
clear level-minded approach to that, and he's,
Hmm.
anyone would consider him to be like the ultimate Bitcoin maxi.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And something else that I found surprising is that Peter Schiff, who has been a long time Bitcoin skeptic,
Yeah.
he said he's the CEO of Euro Pacific, and he said, I get the rationale for a Bitcoin reserve. I don't agree with it, but I get it. We have a gold reserve. Bitcoin is digital gold, which is better than analog gold. So let's create a Bitcoin reserve too. But what's the rationale for an XRP reserve? Why the hell would we need that? Which I was very surprised to see Peter Schiff say anything positive about Bitcoin in that way. But I think this just speaks to the fact that there is a lot going on. We've got Peter Schiff, who has been historically very anti Bitcoin, saying something positive about Bitcoin and how it would make sense to have a strategic reserve. And then we have someone like Michael Saylor, who's been a Bitcoin maxi, saying something that I think a lot of people would be surprised that he is potentially advocating for, maybe even just seeing the other side of things. And so, yeah, it is an interesting conversation. And this is why it's hard to keep up. We've got people who seem to have one opinion, flip flopping, or maybe just like starting to, I wouldn't say flip flopping, maybe seeing the advantages of different currencies or starting to question it or even being willing to have that conversation, which is, I think, one step to moving it forward. And we'll see what happens at this White House summit on Friday. I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know what's going to be talked about, but I'm very interested in hearing about what happens and what we're doing moving forward. And
Yeah.
I think with that, maybe we should point out that like currency shifts in these discussions aren't new. It's new to crypto, to the crypto industry and Bitcoin, in that it's kind of been poo-pooed by the US government for years, and now suddenly we're seeing some positive opinions or acceptance of it. And so we see the industry kind of people already in it jumping on, but then we also have people who are not part of the industry wondering why anybody would see Bitcoin as digital gold, or why they would want a cryptocurrency to be a part of this. And I think it's important to remember that these changes take time, but it's also
Yes.
not new. It's not like a currency shift has never happened before, right? We have shifted from the gold standard. In 1951, President Nixon announced that the US would no longer redeem US dollars for gold, which ended the Bretton Woods system. And basically, it severed the dollar's direct link to gold. Um, and when paper notes came around, people were opposed to it. But so we see things slowly moving along, but we really don't know where we're going. So the goal of this is just to make sure that everybody has the facts. But I think one of the important facts to walk away from is Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency. It was established in 2008. And when the first block was mined, the person whoever Satoshi Nakamoto, this pseudonymous individual who created Bitcoin, they put within the first block, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, which just shows that the intention of Bitcoin was to become a new type of currency and to fix our, some would argue, broken banking system. And so it's been
Yeah.
16 years since Bitcoin came around. And so it's not surprising that we're now seeing this with so many different issues going around financially, that this could be the original intent of Bitcoin, could be what it's used for.
Yeah. And you know what even is more interesting about that, Jessica, is that, there were times, right, where historically gold was even confiscated at some point, right? The US already holds 207,000, I believe, Bitcoin. That's really kind
Hmm.
of primarily from, criminal seizures. Most people know about Silk Road back in the day, but historically those have been kind of auctioned off. So we still have a supply of that. There's also this kind of mindset within the Bitcoin community, some of the purists that say, well, Bitcoin was intentionally mined for a decentralized, peer-to-peer, permissionless, decentralized money. And
Hmm.
this is something that the last thing that we would ever think about is like banks and governments actually, putting this into the fold. So, it's been quite a shift from that. But I think that the important thing is that, we're having conversations and, we can have opinions and voices from all sides that are really kind of talking about this particular matter.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because the original intent of Bitcoin was to bank the unbanked. And so a lot of OG Bitcoiners don't want government involvement in any way. They want it to remain as a peer to peer, permissionless, decentralized money. And it's for people like you and me to send money to, not for the government to have a say in. So a lot of people are questioning, does the strategic reserve go against this original intent of Bitcoin? And so we're seeing a lot of pro reserve arguments and a lot of anti reserve arguments. And I think the pro reserve arguments are about, we're talking about Bitcoin specifically here, but that there's a fixed
Yep.
supply. So it's a hedge against inflation. It can be used as a store of value by corporations and by governments. There's some that believe it could offset national debt, and that it could complement the dollar. And so we've had like Forrest Bay from Foresight Ventures said not adopting Bitcoin might leave the US behind in the global economic race. If the US prints money to buy Bitcoin, it accelerates the dollar's slide into hyperinflation. So the idea would be transitioning gold reserves into Bitcoin, which would avoid inflationary consequences. That's what this person has suggested
Yeah.
as an option. But currently, like you said, Trevor, the stockpiling has been from seized assets, not exchanging one type of asset for another, which is something that would be
Mhm.
very different.
Yeah, it'll be really different as well too, and just with the amount, the supply that's remaining of that, if these large institutions, governments, and things like that are going to kind of start stepping in, there's always this thought about, well, will people actually be have a harder time being able to acquire this? Where is it going to be coming from, right? A lot of it will have to all kind of come over OTC from the limited amount of supply of Bitcoin that are on exchanges. So there's really that kind of
Mhm,
debate as well too. But in terms of some other kind of really cool quotes recently about this particular topic, Jessica, is that Federico Broche, he's the head of business US side at 21 Shares. Mentioned that the launch of a US crypto strategic reserve marks a pivotal moment for digital assets, reflecting a major step in the government's engagement within the crypto industry. So I think that overall, this is something really bullish. And a professor from Cornell University who wrote a book, The Future of Money, about digital assets, said that the US has a precedent for holding a stockpile of speculative assets, right? Gold. Some have referred to Bitcoin as digital gold, as we were mentioning before. But unlike
mhm.
digital assets, gold has some intrinsic value, and the US is not a key player in the gold market. So Bitcoin being like a relatively new asset, and given the sort of amounts that we're talking about with the U.S., it would become a very important player in the market. So that's really kind of different. I think that's something subtle, but it is a major different than what typically historically we've thought about when it comes to gold per se.
Mhm. Yeah, and so there's also been, negative comments. There's arguments against having a reserve. And so people talk about the volatility swings of Bitcoin, which make it pretty risky. I
Yeah.
don't know what it's at right now, but it has gone up and down dramatically. I mean, 10,000, $15,000 per Bitcoin a
Yeah, if,
day,
if
but
you're if you're if you're new to this space, don't check the price every second. You go crazy.
no. It goes like this over time historically, but within this it does
When
a
in
lot of
doubt,
that.
zoom out, right?
Yeah, exactly. But so someone, Nick Carter, who he's a general partner at Castle Island Ventures, but he's also done a lot of work on proof of reserves. He said, we, the US, shouldn't do something that would call into question our own solvency. So
Yeah.
he said Bitcoin reserves would not bolster the dollar. Unlike other countries, the US issues the global reserve currency. Other nations can toy around with acquiring Bitcoin, and indeed a few are. A Bitcoin reserve would undermine, not support the US dollar. So, and I believe Nick Carter is, from my understanding, pro crypto. He's worked in the space for a while. So the question is not necessarily, is Bitcoin good? The question is it good for the US as a strategic reserve, which is a different question, I think, as well. And, we'd have to ask ourselves, how would the government handle the 50% price swings that we just talked about? Um, Certainly, if everybody was checking the treasury, if it was on chain and you could see it and everyone was checking the treasury go up and down, it might instill some concerns, I would
Yeah,
say.
and also too, in terms of that volatility, Jessica, there was a quote that we picked up as well too from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and essentially, kind of what they were arguing is that while Bitcoin's price currently experiences these fluctuations as potentially like a Federal Reserve would in the long run be a tool for financial resilience for a federal government. So as Bitcoin matures and its markets deepen, its
Mhm.
volatility is likely to decrease, making it more stable form of kind of a store of value long term. And that's kind of what the group they were alluding to. So,
Right.
yes, no, go for that.
I was going to just explain, if you've got a small puddle, like if you think of the amount of Bitcoin as a small puddle, and you throw a stone into it, a pebble into it, there's going to be quite a ripple. But as the puddle turns into a pond, turns into an ocean, you throw that pebble in it, it's going to have a very small impact on it.
Yes.
So as there's more and more in circulation, being used more frequently, we will, in theory, see the volatility go down, and it would be like throwing a pebble into the ocean versus now where I don't think it's a puddle, but it's definitely a pond, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as well too, right? We've been kind of talking about just the local impact, but there's obviously as well too. This is a
Right.
global issue. The U.S. isn't the only
Hmm.
people, or we're not the only player in this. Obviously, other nations, China,
Hmm.
Russia, El Salvador, these people are accumulating it. There's conversations from different national banks talking about potentially the Czech National Republic Bank. I believe that they were considering 5% into kind of their reserves, and there's obviously opposition from the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde,
Hmm.
who is from the ECB, was kind of thinking about the rationalization that reserves have to be liquid, that reserves have to be secure, and that they have to be safe, and that should be not plagued by the suspicion of money laundering and other criminal activities. And that's just kind of going back to the old narrative that that's something that only cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, has historically been used for. So there are sides that are kind of pro and for against this, but then when it comes to like what was happening with El Salvador, they were that was a really interesting use case because back in 2021, they were the first country to really adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender. And
Hmm.
a lot of people would say that it's a success. They've really been able to bring a lot more attraction, kind of turn their overall financial situation that was quite bleak. They've been able to really kind of turn that around, right? And
Hmm.
then most recently, as of December of last year, the IMF granted 1.5, $1.4 billion loan, and that's kind of requiring El Salvador to kind of scale back on their Bitcoin adoption, and meaning that
Right.
as of January 2025, it's been reclassified as a voluntarily legal tender, kind of removed from that mandate that businesses to accept it and prohibit it for tax payments. So even that, there's a lot of people that would say that was a success of use case and experiment with Bitcoin. But why are we kind of going back to incorporating loans from the IMF and then kind of returning it to something
Yep.
that is fiat based? But I think that overall we're seeing real leaps and bounds in terms of just different types of conversations, potential just ways of thinking from the individual to the government level as well too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin is supposed to be used as a financial inclusionary tool, basically.
Yeah,
That is the goal of it, to make financial services accessible to the billions of people who don't have access. I think what is it, 1.8 billion are unbanked, something like that. Um, and so Bitcoin, the idea of Bitcoin being something that could fix that, then if we have a country like El Salvador saying like, yes, we're going to use it and this is how it's going to benefit people, and then we have some group like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, come in and change that, we're now bringing back in these larger organizations and changing how, I don't know, we're, I guess, reverting back to how fiat was used rather than saying, hey, here's this new tool. Maybe we could make changes in our financial systems to be more inclusive, so that people who don't have the typical access like what we do in the United States, um, so they could have that. And another time when we're on this, we can maybe talk about some use cases and how crypto is being used around the world. You and I have done stream on this before. We could go on about it
yeah.
forever, but focus, Jess. Okay, we're doing Bitcoin strategic reserves. And so one of the things that I think we also want to talk about was just like Bitcoin is decentralized, it's transparent. It may make sense as a reserve asset for some of those things, but we want to hear from you guys. If you're listening to this, if you have comments, if you want to, add us or continue the conversation, this is us giving you all the news. And Trevor and I have done a lot of research on this, which was hard to keep up with, to be perfectly honest, because it's changing so quickly, but also pretty fun to make sure that we're in the know about everything. But we would
Yeah,
love to hear what people are thinking. This is just, not even our opinions, just the facts of what is going on right now. But I
yeah.
do think it's a pretty exciting time.
Yeah, we're laying the groundwork. We want to give some Easter eggs in these type of episodes, and that's the point of this, right? So that we can be neutral. I know that we are a bit biased because we are both professionals working in this industry, but nonetheless, we want to keep this really sticking to the facts as best as we can, and what information's
Yep.
out there, and what's considered a fact. I mean, even in this and age, that's up for debate, right? But at least if we have
Hmm.
a baseline where we're presenting to you some of the things that are going on, people who are talking about this, and that will allow you, if there's anything in particular that you find interesting or you're intrigued about that, then you can go and DYOR, which is do your own research, and continue to
Hmm.
learn about these particular things on your own. And as we mentioned before, right, 24 hours, what a difference a day makes. There's so much that goes on in our space. It is moving at a lightning pace, but that's one of the great things about it. So let's just kind of wrap it up, Jess, in terms
Hmm.
of what we've kind of covered today.
Yeah. So Bitcoin reserves might sound like this niche crypto debate, but I really think they are and could continue to shake up the economy, change maybe inflation, how money works. I mean, it already has changed how money works, but it could change how money works at a government, nation state level. So currently, there are governments stockpiling Bitcoin, but is it going to change to them intentionally acquiring this, not through seizures? And if so, which currencies is it going to be? And so I guess love it or hate it. This conversation isn't just for crypto insiders anymore. This is a conversation for anyone who uses money, which I'm going to guess is just about everyone. So it's something that's definitely affecting all of us.
Yeah, and then like closing it out, just another thing for people to think about with in terms of current events. There's obviously a lot of conversation about, at least here in the U.S., about auditing Fort Knox and actually seeing how much gold that we have on hand. And we're talking about Bitcoin, which is the equivalent of the digital gold. Well, the great thing about
Hmm.
Bitcoin is that you can go on chain and you can always verify. You don't necessarily just have to trust, right? That's
Yep.
not necessarily the same when it comes to actual physical gold. But as I mentioned before, right, everything has its own use cases. And I think that this has been a very productive conversation, Jessica. Really excited
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
get this kicked off and really super excited to come back in a couple of weeks and bring some more awesome conversations for you guys to talk about here.
Yeah, so Blockchain Simplified is going to be every 2 weeks. We're going to be pulling together current events like we did today, along with facts about the actual cryptocurrencies and how blockchains work in general. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. Stay tuned for the event on LinkedIn, and then also we'll let you know what the next topic is. And it changes so fast, who knows?
Yes,
But thank you so
indeed.
much, Trevor. This was fun. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Look forward to continuing the conversation.